Welcome back to the 430 movie. We got our expert programmers here to curate fantasy theme weeks of classic films.
From 1998, film directed by Steven Soderbergh called Out of Sight.
Yes.
Soderbergh directs it with such a sort of confident, self-assured style.
Lex Luthor in Superman.
What is it about Gene Hackman that...
His performance, it's off the charts, but still in reality. Fiendishly gifted.
1981 Sam Raimi opus, The Evil Dead.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Fine choice.
Sam Raimi invented entirely new ways to get shots that should not have been possible with the amount of money that he did not have.
Charade.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Directed
good.
by Stanley Donen. It's a textbook screenplay. It's just effortless, and there's not a wrong note in this movie. Can't say enough great things about it. We'll be back next Friday with an all-new episode of the 430 movie, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Join us now for the 430 movie.
The 430 Movie Podcast is available weekly wherever you listen to podcasts and on the free Electric Now app. Download it today.
Hello and welcome to Best Movies Never Made, the podcast where we talk about interesting and infamous movies that never made it to or through production. Most of the time, the movies you're trying to make don't get made.
Like 4 of them may happen, 1 of them may happen, none of them may happen, and I'll be attached to 3 more things by end of summer.
Turn the script into something resembling like Unforgiven with Conan.
Yeah.
Sadly, the rights expired and the whole thing just like went away overnight.
New episodes will be available every other Monday. We won't see you at the movies.
Best Movies Never Made, as featured in Entertainment Weekly, is available wherever you listen to podcasts and on the free Electric Now app. If you think you felt a great disturbance in the Force, you're not wrong. Ed Gross and me, Mark Altman, have a new oral history from St. Martin's Press. It's Secrets of the Force, the complete, uncensored, unauthorized oral history of the Star Wars saga. So wherever you buy books, audio, and video, pick it up today, and you can learn the secrets of the Force. And don't miss our oral history of Star Trek in stores now. And of course, nobody does it better. The complete oral history of James Bond in digital, hardcover, paperback, and audio. That is all. Hey, this is Mark Altman.
And this is Darren Doctorman, and we are the Inglorious
Treksperts. And I want to welcome you. I haven't cleared that music there, Darren. You can't hum. So
It's only with 3 notes. It's fine.
I just want to say that for a long time, our idea of Bible study was limited to pondering such intangibles as what does God need with the starship. But these last few weeks, we've found religion. We've done a much deeper dive into Bible study. We looked at the Bible for the original Star Trek pilot. We looked at the Bible, the writer and director's guide for The Next Generation, for Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager. We even did Star Trek Enterprise. And now we go back to the beginning. Genesis, the original Star Trek series Bible.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
I don't know about those other people, but for me, give me that old time religion.
That old time religion. That old
Darren
time rock
Doctorman,
and roll,
Calvinist.
baby.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. He's not an evangelist. He's an old timer. He's an old timer. But this has been a fun series, I have to say, exploring these Bibles and looking at the origins of a lot of these stories and characters and how much stayed or how little stayed and how much changed over the seasons. But it's been really interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I found it interesting to see the progression of how these Bibles were used. In the beginning, it was very much a method to sort of pitch the idea to the studio, etc. But as it became that there really wasn't a studio and that it was the production company that would make the decisions about it, basically, it became more of a tool to help let everyone know what the show was supposed to be, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I got to ask you, Ashley, because I'm sure you've had the same experience I had, before we became showrunners working on other people's shows, where they hand you the Bible and you sort of read it and go, this is never going to happen. No way, or this sounds great. And it never finds its way into the show.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the time. But I think that's the entire function of the Bible, right? Very often the Bible is an aspirational document. Also, it's simply evidence that no plan survives the first encounter with the enemy.
Yeah.
And the enemy is production. And the good news is that there are things that we learn in television as we move forward. We think that certain sets are always going to be with us. We're always going to use them. And then we never go there. We think that certain actors are really going to anchor our show. And then no, it turns out to be the person that we least expected is the most interesting one to write for. And maybe someone who wasn't even in the Bible turns out to be that.
That's so funny you say that because, I hadn't even thought of it until you mentioned it. But I think one of the great things about shooting in LA when we're shooting in LA as opposed to in Atlanta or Vancouver or Bulgaria, it's when, we were at Fox. I'm thinking of Agent X in particular was a show we did for TNT. And I remember at one point, just walking the sets late at night with Steve Crozier. And we're like, we are going to find the sets that we've never shot on before that we built. And it's literally like we were looking for rooms and we found them that had been built and never, like virtually, if not, and never used in the show. And we were just going to write scenes just to use stuff because it's true. You build these sets and then sometimes you never use them.
Yeah, they just sit there and you even forget that they exist. They're a line item in the budget that like they're nothing. It's so strange. It's like the Bible is really a glorified suggestion. I mean, sometimes look, it's a great suggestion. But very often it doesn't survive actual production. It doesn't survive actual experience. But I think that's a good thing. It's like, the famous story about Babylon 5 was always that, that J. Michael Straczynski had his 5-year plan. He had it all mapped out. And you know what? I'm sure that on some level, he had some notion of what each of those 5 seasons was going to be. And God
Absolutely.
Bless him. But the reality is you can't possibly know, right? And if you do say ahead of time that you know exactly what those episodes are going to be in like your 5th season, you're kind of a fool if you stick to that plan because it means you learn nothing over the course of production.
Not only that, he certainly couldn't have anticipated losing half his cast.
Absolutely not.
There were so many changes that were unanticipated, like Michael O'Hare leaving at the end of the 1st season, and obviously Claudia leaving at the end of the 4th season. Mm-hmm. So all those were unanticipated, and then of course he got thrown that curveball of it looked like the show was going to be canceled after 4 seasons. So he ends the show only to get picked up, and then has to tread water for the 5th season. So it's a monumental achievement, and hats off to Joe. But absolutely, to say I have it all figured out for the next 5 years, that's virtually impossible in TV because things evolve, things change, and a lot of that comes, as you mentioned last week, from the casting. It comes from it comes from your keys too. It could be your production designer who has an amazing idea that sends you in a completely different direction, or if look at Deep Space Nine. I don't think anyone expected that by the 7th season, Garrick would be one of the most beloved characters who had probably been in more of the episodes than some of the leads.
Of course not. I mean, from the Bible, you wouldn't even know that he really existed. I mean, and there's so many characters that are like that.
It could come from your production designer, whom you've told to build sets that you'll never shoot on.
Yeah.
Who would that be, Darren? Well, would you know something about that?
There's a love-hate relationship between production and art department. It's a give and take. Mostly it's a take.
But, it can also be like your set decorator, your art director, who puts things on the set, like it could be the captain's ready room or something like that, that informs the character.
Absolutely.
And you're like, oh, look at that. What is that? And then you figure out, oh, this is something they got on a mission. What was that mission? Who, and somebody died on that mission. And so,
you could have a piece of set deck that came from an episode where the entire point was you were hunting down the very origins of intelligent life in the galaxy, and you happen to have it on your desk. But when you find it at the end of your first movie, you just kind of toss it over your shoulder like it's not.
And it shatters into pieces.
That's right. Good job, Captain Picard.
No, absolutely. And you think, I got to tell you, after studying, being a student of Star Trek for all these years, that, on the first season when we did Pandora, money was tight, so I didn't build the cave set. And it was like the stupidest thing. I scouted these great caves. I'm going to use these actual caves. We
always need
great caves in Bulgaria.
And yeah, they had but the second season, what was the first thing I built? A freaking cave set. But the first rule of sci-fi, it's always build a freaking cave set.
It's not ironic.
Yeah, right. It kind of is. It kind of is. And I used to make fun of on Next Generation how many times, it's like they find themselves in the cave. So, okay, before we start, let's take care of some quick housekeeping here. I want to first of all,
or quick shout out.
You're going to shout out?
That's the housekeeper.
Oh,
yeah, the housekeeper. Remember in the original Dune?
Right. Right.
Who is she? The housekeeper. That was Linda Hunt, and then she was gone. But I that was the one thing I thought in Denis Villeneuve's thing. I said, okay, this character is going to get a lot more love than it did in David Lynch's. But she's barely in it before she gets killed. Spoiler alert. Well, I think it was exactly the same in Denis Villeneuve's movie. It's like they make a big point of her being picked as the housekeeper from all the, we get the job interview and everything.
Right.
And then she's picked. And
it's a 30-minute scene. She provides her references.
Yeah.
Like there's like there's a translator.
And then she's dead. And then she's gone. Just like
anyway, that takes care of the housekeeping.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you guys both see Dune?
Yeah, actually. You know what? I'm going to go on record and say I liked it. I think that my ultimate opinion on it is going to depend on what a part 2 looks like and how it all feels together. I do think that it's unquestionable to me that it owes an enormous debt to the David Lynch movie. There are so many choices in that film that I don't think that you would have arrived at without the David Lynch film.
It owes a water debt.
It does. Even the Hans Zimmer score, frankly, which I think is great, but like I don't think you get there without Toto and Brian Eno. I don't think that you're motivated to do that without Toto and Brian Eno.
I can't go there about the score. I thought that was the worst part of the film for me.
Interesting. Like I will say, I
like the film, Darren.
I liked it, but it did make me appreciate the Lynch version even more.
Right. But in fairness, you love the Lynch version. You can quote the Lynch version.
I can quote it, yeah. But it's also batshit crazy.
Oh, it is, totally. But we have this affection. I certainly have an affection for it. I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought that the Zimmer score, which has gotten so much notice, I thought was merely fine. Like it was like there were things that I thought were really cool, but I thought that like
I just wondered why the Fremen have Wonder Woman's theme song.
You know what? If Wonder Woman is a Fremen, I'm in. Yeah, Wonder Fremen.
But she's not.
I'm there. Well, she should be.
I it's very interesting to hear you because I mean there seems to be so much love out there, and it's funny because I think the same way you guys do. Like I admired it, I enjoyed it, but there's something about the David Lynch movie that's so out there for all its flaws that kept it really interesting. And I love that first scene when the guild navigator comes out and meets Jose Ferrer. And that is just so cool. And this didn't have anything like that.
I do have to say, for those who are interested in learning more about it, on YouTube, there is a a fan cut of all the available footage from all the versions of the Lynch movie.
Ooh.
And it's really good.
Oh, really? I'll have to watch
It's really
that.
good. And you can see even more of the scenes that were lifted directly whole cloth and put in the Villeneuve.
Well, I'll say this in Dune's favor. 2021 Dune. I guess it was 2020, really, but who's counting?
Dune 2048.
Right. Dune 2048, the prequel to Dune 2049. Which again, I really dug the movie. But what I most appreciated about it is my son, Caden, 12 years old, went to see that movie twice.
Really?
Yes, and he really dug it. And I thought, you know what? If that is his gateway drug into, serious-minded science fiction, and this kind of storytelling with a real filmmaker's eye behind it, I'm all for it. And he wants to watch the David Lynch version. It's like, that to me was such a pleasure of going to see that movie. It was like knowing that he did it.
Not to be a one-upsman, but
okay.
My son Jared, I showed the Lynch version to him when he was 12,
and he shot.
He loved it, and he said, "I want to find out more about this." And I said, "It happens to be a book, so here's the book. Enjoy it." 2 days later, he could quote from the book.
God bless him. That's awesome.
It was unfreaking believable. And
you know what?
One of the greatest parts of my life.
That's terrific. I love that. I need to give Caden Dune. I think I'm sure it'll be like 2 years later he'll read it. But you know what? That's inspiring. I love that.
Wow. Oh, I forgot to tell you because my 12-year-old has no interest in seeing Dune, but just finished Terminator 2 and RoboCop this weekend.
God bless him.
Boy,
the real RoboCop, not the bullshit RoboCop.
He loved those movies. Oh my God. Yeah.
Oh my God, dude! I would not have had the stomach for RoboCop at 12. No way.
I was reluctant to show it to him, and I did show him the theatrical version. He has, it's his director's cut. We should watch that. I'm like, I don't have it. I don't have it. And I watched we watched the theatrical cut.
I love Paul Verhoeven, Dad. Do you have Black Book?
Yeah, but he does want to watch Starship Troopers now. But we watched the theatrical. He loved it. He loved it. He thought it was great. And it's good because now he finally wants to watch Die Hard because they mentioned it in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So
okay,
I'm grateful to Brooklyn Nine-Nine for whatever that is.
Well, you should give it to him for Christmas because it's a Christmas movie.
We are going to watch it for Christmas, and boy, it's going to piss off Steve Melching. But wrong podcast for that. Okay,
wrong podcast.
Look, I think we're going to talk more about Dune. Both David Lynch and the Denis Villeneuve on our holiday
edition.
I know a lot of you are wondering what our big 3-part supersized special would be this year.
That's going to turn out to be 6 parts, given our usual mathematics.
7.5 hour
odyssey. You can drive across country listening to.
We began this tradition with the 101 greatest Star Trek episodes of all time. We continued it with the 101 greatest Star Trek moments of all time. Last year, we topped ourselves with 101 greatest sci-fi episodes of all time. And this year, we're excited to announce that Ashley, Rob Burnett, Darren, and myself will be recording and releasing to you as our holiday gift to the world, the 101 greatest sci-fi movies of all time.
And then next year is the 101 greatest Dalmatians of all time.
And I have to say, it'll be interesting to see if Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock makes the cut. The only way to find out is to listen to all 44 hours. But by the way, before we move on, I think we all want to send our good wishes and congratulations to Nick Meyer on the engagement of his daughter to Kristen Stewart. That's exciting stuff. And we wish them much happiness and long life and
peace
prosperity.
And long life.
Yeah. So that's good. Congratulations to Nick, along with the release of his new book, his new Sherlock Holmes book, which I'm sure will be terrific. And I'm looking forward to reading it because his last one was wonderful. So, okay.
And hopefully we'll read it before he comes on the show again.
Right?
Well, you can count on that.
Yeah, we won't. I don't know that we could pull that out of our ass again. And Yeah.
Anyway, well, look, you know, so let's get ready. Let's get serious because it's time for Bible study. And we are going to be looking at the original Star Trek Writers and Directors Guide. This was actually published. This is the third revision, April 17th, 1967. So it was deep into the filming of the first season. It was right before the hiatus for our second season. And it starts like Rafe Needleman wrote it with a question.
A question.
But wait, before we go there, there's something that I kind of have to say as a technical point. Now, I know that we've been referring to these as Bible studies, and I know that we've been referring to these documents that we've been reading as Bibles. But the truth of the matter is, and I think we'll find this out as we go through this document, that the format of it, which is very interesting and very different and very strange, it's very question and answer. It's a summation. I think it's more accurate to say that this isn't so much a Bible as a catechism. And I'm all for like
a Star Trek of Voyager, a cataclysm.
A cataclysm, exactly. Like a little catechism study. I think if we're going to be technical, and I think it's important in Star Trek to be technical, that we're looking at the catechism of Star Trek. I'm just putting that out there.
All right.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out, Ashley Miller.
Okay. I'm all about the scientific accuracy.
And someone needs to be. So
it opens up with a quiz.
A quiz.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what I mean.
Rafe Needleman, man.
What did Jesus mean when he said, okay.
and in Judaism, it's like Passover.
Yeah.
Why do we recline?
I don't know. Let me go forward and let me read this question that is on here. It says, can you find the major Star Trek format error in the following teaser from a story outline? Let's quickly go through that.
Well, can you, punk?
I can. The scene is the bridge of the USS United States spaceship Enterprise. Captain Kirk is at the command position. His lovely but highly efficient female yeoman at his side, as if she could be lovely and not highly efficient.
That's right.
Suddenly, and without provocation, our starship is attacked by an alien space vessel. We try to warn the alien vessel off, but it ignores us and begins loosening bolts of photon energy plasma at us.
Those bastards.
Now, the alien vessel's attack begins to weaken our deflectors. Mr. Spock reports to Captain Kirk that the next enemy bolt will probably break through and destroy the Enterprise. At this moment, we look up to see the final energy plasma bolt heading for us. There may be only 4 or 5 seconds of life left. Kirk puts his arms around his lovely yeoman, comforting and embracing her as they wait for what seems certain death.
It seemed the proper way.
That it is. So now we're supposed to check one of these. Is the answer number 1, inaccurate terminology? The Enterprise is more correctly an international vessel, the United Spaceship Enterprise.
Oh, that.
Scientifically incorrect. That's number 2. Energy plasma bolts could not be photon in nature.
Photon wave nature.
Number 3, unbelievable. The captain would not hug pretty yeoman on the bridge of his vessel.
Oh, I don't know if that's fucking unbelievable. Okay.
Or number 4, concept weak. This whole story opening reeks too much of space pirate or similar bad science fiction.
What the hell is wrong with space pirates?
Now, before we answer that question, next week on the TREKSPERTS.
What the hell is wrong with space pirates?
Before we answer that question, I just want to say I have never in the history of television read a quiz book. A show pod will be, I love it. It just goes to show how gonzo, and I have to say, I wonder again if this was Gene Kuhn, because Roddenberry was kind of out of the picture at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly has his sense of humor,
his puckishness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he likes to poke the bear.
He does,
and this kind of does it.
The bear and the bear. The bear is being poked.
Why is that bear smiling? Gene Kuhn is poking.
There are people at home who are like, "Shut up! We just want to know the answer."
What?
Let's indulge them. Indulge them. Indulge yourself, Mr. Sulu. No, we're not joking. The preceding page was very real. Typo. The preceding page was a very real and important test of your approach to science fiction. Here's why. Tell them why, Ashley.
Well, if you said inaccurate terminology, you're wrong. I mean, sure, United States spaceship was in fact incorrect, but it's easily fixed. They do want directors, writers, actors, and others to use proper terminology, but that is far from being the biggest screw up in Star Trek format error.
Okay,
if you
Darren?
said, go ahead.
If you said scientifically inaccurate, wrong again. Beware if you catch this one. Although we do want to be scientifically accurate, we found that the selection of this item usually indicates a preoccupation with science and gadgetry over people and story.
Why does I feel like a shot at another Gene?
Okay, but we're not done yet. Is it because the concept is weak? Wrong again.
This one's for you, Fred Freiberger.
Wrong again, Batman.
It is, in fact, much like the opening of one of our best episodes of last year. Aliens.
Oh my God, have they done aliens on Star Trek? How awesome was that?
That's what I was thinking. I don't remember Sigourney Weaver in Star Trek. Enemy vessels, sudden attack, and such things can range from Buck Rogers to classical literature, all depending on how it's handled. Witness H.G. Wells's novels, Forrester's sea stories, and so on. Which brings us, Darren, to understanding
the right answer to this is basic to understanding the Star Trek format. This was the correct answer.
That's the equation.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Why the correct answer? Simply because we've learned during a full season of making visual science fiction that believability of characters, their actions and reactions is our greatest need and is the most important angle factor. Let's explore that briefly on the next page.
I want to stop for a second. As much as we're joking about this whole...
It's absolutely right.
It's 100% right.
And this simple paragraph is the key to understanding Star Trek.
This simple feeling is beyond most offending. In fact, I would argue that this paragraph is the proof of your thesis, sir, that this is something that came from the pen of Gene Coon versus Gene Roddenberry.
Well,
not that Gene doesn't care about characters. They're two different Genes, but not that Gene Roddenberry doesn't care about characters. But I feel, but the emphasis on it, right? Saying that like this is the thing that we care most about, feels like a thing that Gene Coon would say.
Yeah.
It may very well be, but I will tell you again, this paragraph, this paragraph should be on the wall of every producer of Star Trek fare from now to time immemorial.
Especially now.
More than ever.
Now more than ever.
Simply because we've learned during a full season, I'm repeating, of making visual science fiction, that believability of characters, their actions and reactions is our greatest need and is the most important angle factor. Let's explore that.
Character is our business. That's what this show is about.
Now let's try this again. The same basic story situation, but against another background. The time is today. We're in Vietnam waters aboard the Navy cruiser USS Detroit. Suddenly, an enemy gunboat heads for us. Our guns are unable to stop it, and we realize it's a suicide attack with an atomic warhead. Total destruction of our vessel and of all aboard appears probable. Would Captain E.L. Henderson, presently commanding the USS Detroit, turn and hug a comely female wave who happened to be on the ship's bridge?
He might, Rabbit.
No, but Captain Roddenberry would.
Yeah, damn right he would.
Great point.
Well, first of all, if the Viet Cong had an atomic warhead, they wouldn't put on a boat to take out the USS Detroit.
But you know what? Let's put the silliness aside.
Right?
Has he just set up an interesting scenario which has tension and suspense and is compelling television? I think so.
However, the way the captain acts
is not the way a captain would act.
Right.
Exactly.
As simple as that.
Exactly.
They continue, this is our standard test that has led to Star Trek believability. It also suggests much of what has been wrong in film sci-fi of the past.
And the future.
No, Captain Henderson wouldn't. Not if he's the kind of captain we hope he is, commanding any naval vessel of ours. Nor would our Captain Kirk hug a female crewman in a moment of danger. Not if he's to remain believable. Some might prefer Henderson were somewhere making love rather than shelling Asiatic ports, but that's a whole different story for a whole different network, probably BBC.
Gene Coon. Gene Coon.
Okay.
Sorry.
Really a great look. This is all so important because we're not just talking, in this, it's the 60s. We're talking about hugging a female crew member, saying this would be totally wrong and out of character and hurt believability. But what if we put it in the future? Hugging a crewman on the bridge for any reason. Totally inappropriate.
What's hugging on the bridge? There's no hugging on the bridge.
There's no crying at baseball. There's no hugging on the bridge. And so in every scene of our Star Trek story, translate it into a real life situation, or sometimes as useful, try it in your mind as a scene in Gunsmoke, Naked City, or some similar show. Would you believe the people and the scene if it happened there? If you're one of those who answers the character acts that way because it's science fiction, don't call us. We'll call you.
Eventually.
Never.
And that means they won't call him.
Never.
Look, that's
no
a great
call.
That's a great teaser for the Bible.
Absolutely.
I loved the way they opened with that. This is a scene. Is it good? Is it bad? Why is that?
Yeah.
And this is why it's not our show.
Tell them.
Fantastic. It's great. And because now we go right into the first act of the Bible,
right.
The Star Trek format. It explains to us who our characters are. A captain, Jim Kirk, a first officer, Mr. Spock. And I love the way he describes this next set of characters, a group of regulars who make up our television family. That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. Dr. McCoy, Scotty, Uhura, Sulu, Nurse Christine, and others as detailed later. Well, because remember, this is still the end of the first season.
That's
Guest
true.
stars, if the story demands it, but with a story which also emphasizes our series leads.
Right.
On a giant starship, a familiar television home base, the USS Enterprise, on a patrol of a section of our galaxy, our vessel representing Earth and the Federation, assisting colonists, aiding in scientific exploration, putting down conflicts, helping those in distress, regulating trade, engaging in diplomatic missions, and so on. Here's another thing about this. Remember a couple of weeks ago when we did the Bible for the Cage?
Yeah.
Forgot it entirely.
Which was interesting, which was a, interesting Bible. And we had a lot to say about it. And it really helped, provide the building blocks for what would become Star Trek. Look how much they've improved on that already with this Bible.
Yeah, it's laser focused.
It is, but at this point, they've had a year of experience making this show and figuring out exactly what the show is. And this document has a very practical purpose beyond the purpose that most Bibles have. It's why I think it's probably best described as a catechism, because it is described as the writer-director's guide, right? And I believe that the function of this document was to help the many freelancers and the directors who come onto the show understand the show they're making. In essence, they're toning everybody, as we like to say in the business. They're saying, this is what the show is. This is the things that you need to know and you need to understand in order to succeed in being a collaborator
and if you
in our
can't
creative
go
endeavor.
Along with it, then we probably can't use you.
That's right.
Distress call definitely came from one of the solar systems in this sector, Captain.
Can you pinpoint it any closer, Lieutenant?
Negative. It was so badly garbled, all we got was the name Constellation. Then we lost it.
Sir, we're now within the limits of system L370, but I can't seem to locate...
Captain, sensors show this entire solar system has been destroyed. Nothing left but rubble and asteroids.
That's incredible. The star in this system is still intact. Only a nova could destroy like that.
Nonetheless, Captain, sensors show nothing but debris where we charted 7 planets last year.
Continue your search pattern.
I see. Entering limits of system L374, sir. Scanners show the same evidence of destruction.
Every solar system in this sector blasted to rubble. There's still no sign of the constellation. Matt Decker's in command. What could have happened to him?
Captain, the 2 innermost planets of this system appear to be intact.
Sir, I'm picking up a ship's disaster beacon.
Try to raise her, Lieutenant.
Have it on the sensors, Captain. By configuration, a starship. Stopped in space, she appears to be drifting.
No answer, Captain. All I get is the automatic beacon.
Sensors not recording normal energy output.
Approach course, Mr. Sulu. It's the constellation. Look at that.
She may have been wrecked by whatever destroyed these solar systems.
She was attacked. Red alert, red alert, man your battle stations.
Red alert, man your battle stations.
But here's the other thing to know. You know, if you're writing a Bible at that point, and for those who don't know, whose mind is in the gutter, Naked City was a cop show.
Yeah, I hope you hug Yeoman on the Naked City.
The Naked City is a reference to, you know, an urban center. Okay.
Right.
So if you're writing a cop show like Naked City, if you're writing a Western like Gunsmoke, you know, there is a template for what a show like that is. Star Trek, like Vina, there was no blueprint for putting it together. They were inventing this from scratch. That is what is so incredible at this point, that there is this fundamental understanding of exactly how to do the show.
But
after
I think that statement of they were inventing it from scratch is not accurate, because as you can see, they were inventing it from previous forms of TV drama. And
fair enough.
Taking those formats and converting them into this Star Trek format, which, even though it takes place in the future, could very well play on board a Navy ship in Vietnam.
Yes, but even if you're taking from column A and column B and you're putting together, you know, you still, it's not a dish that's on the menu. You're creating your own new dish.
You are synthesizing a new thing from
in the Chinese restaurant. You order the poo-poo platter, right? But it comes with the shrimp toast and spare ribs and everything. But whatever you create from it is new, right? It's not the poo-poo platter. You're taking the different ingredients and making your own thing.
You keep saying poo-poo.
Well, isn't that what that is?
But I mean, look, like, again, like that Bible was, here's what we think it's going to be. This document is, here is what it has in fact become and what it must be.
So Darren, if you will, let's find out the key to the Star Trek format.
Yes, the Star Trek format is actually that simple. If you're a TV professional, you already know the following 7 rules.
Theoretically.
Rule 1, build your episode on an action-adventure framework. We must reach out, hold, and entertain a mass audience of some 20 million people, or we simply don't stay on the air.
Can we stop for a minute?
Yeah.
Can we stop?
I know.
20 million people, or we don't stay on the air. Can you imagine any show getting 20 million people? In today's market.
No.
Oh my God, 20 million people. That's just such an enormous number today. Sorry, I just had to flag that because that's almost unbelievable science fiction to me. But of course, it's what it was.
We'll change the name to Squid Trek.
That's also a great guide as to why it had to be good. or it
That's
had to
right.
be entertaining and quality at that
That's
time
right.
because they were fighting to stay on the air.
Right.
Yeah. They weren't engaging in niche craft. They weren't like, hey, we've got like a bunch of fans. We got like 3 guys who are like watching it every time like a new bunch of episodes drops. Like, it's like, no, you got to
There's
hit
about
20
400
million
guys up there.
So Darren, you just told us number 1, the action
sorry.
adventure framework. Tell us what number 2 is.
Number 2, tell your story. Number 2 is the poo-poo platter. Number 2, tell your story about people, not about science and gadgetry. Joe Friday doesn't stop to explain the mechanics of his .38 caliber before he uses it. Kildare never did a monologue about the theory of anesthetics.
I'd like to have heard that.
I want to see both of those scenes.
Matt Dillon never identifies and discusses the breed of his horse before he rides off on it.
It's very Cormac McCarthy if he did.
That's really funny.
Love all
That's
of that.
that's streaming today.
Yeah.
Streaming. Matt Dillon would talk about his horse for
And the
40
breeding of
minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just taking a little break this episode.
Yeah. Now, number 3, Darren.
Number 3, keep in mind that science fiction is not a separate field of literature with rules of its own, but indeed needs the same ingredients as any story, including a jeopardy of some type to someone we learn to care about. Climactic build, sound motivation, you know the list. For crying out loud. Number 4, then, with that firm foundation established, interweave it in any statement to be made about man, society, and so on. Yes, we want you to have something to say, but say it entertainingly, as you do on any other show. We don't need essays, however brilliant.
Let that be your last battlefield. Cough. Let that be your last battlefield.
Exactly. Boy, but what they do need, a proofreader. But okay.
Well, you know.
Darren, if you'll continue, number 5.
I will. Number 5, remember always that Star Trek is never fantasy. Whatever happens, no matter how unusual or bizarre, must have some basis in either fact or theory and stay true to that premise. Don't give the enemy starflight capability and then have them engage our vessel with grappling hooks and drawn swords. Unless you establish that personal shields are a method of fighting.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, and again, something else Fred Freiberg violated with Day of the Dove.
That's right. That's exactly the example I was about to use. But you know what? I kind of have a soft spot.
Hey, that sounds like a good idea.
Let's do that.
Number 6. Don't try to tell a story about whole civilizations. We've never yet been able to get a usable story from a writer who began, I see the strange civilization which ... The
Yangs and
Focus.
Sorry.
Number 7. Stop worrying about not being a scientist. How many cowboys, police officers, and doctors wrote westerns, detective, and hospital shows? Huh? Tell me that.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point. You know, I mean, I think if, you know, and lawyers who write legal shows.
But you know what? There are lawyers who write legal shows and
they
cops
do
who
well.
write cop shows.
I think it gives them an advantage.
It does.
But look, or what happens when you have a cop write a sci-fi show like Burton Armus?
Or
Gene Roddenberry.
Wow, there you go. Or Gene Roddenberry. Exactly. Okay. Well, those are all really great points, and
and we all enjoyed them very, very much.
Yes.
We did, and I think I think that it really gets to the bottom of, you know, it helps really distill what the formula of Star Trek is and isn't, and they do it. You know, I mean, this to me is perhaps the best Bible we've read so far.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, this is great guides for writing drama and television anyway.
Well, and that's why so much of it is excerpted in The Making of Star Trek,
right,
by Stephen Whitfield, Nee Po, and Gene Roddenberry. And we, you know, for anyone who is an aspiring writer who hasn't read The Making of Star Trek, they must do that. And also David Gerald's The Making of Trouble with Tribbles, which is also a pretty terrific book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So now they break down the format of the show, the teaser and the acts. Obviously, the teaser, you know, certainly in that era, well, in any era, but this was something that was kind of lost later on. But we open with action, always establishing a strong Jeopardy need or other hook. It is not necessary to establish all the backstory in the teaser. Instead, we tantalize the audience with the promise of excitement to come. For example, it can be as simple as everyone tense on the bridge, hunting down a marauding enemy ship. Then a telltale blip is sighted on the screen, and the captain orders all hands to battle stations. Fade out. That's enough. Yeah, I mean, this has sort of changed as commercials have gone away,
or became more prevalent.
Star Trek, brought to you by Polaroid, makers of the 1967 economy model of the Polaroid Color Pack camera. And by Viceroy for the taste that's right any time of the day.
Well, but I mean, I think if even on Next Generation, there's very soft teasers for the most part.
For sure. Like that whole philosophy definitely changed. I'll tell you something else that changed that's a little bit deeper on this page is first drafts can run up to 70 pages.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely no more than 65. Now, look, that's partly, I think, a function of the fact that at the time, the episodes could run much longer. I mean, like now we're at a place
54 minutes.
Right. And now, network is 42. So that makes sense. But what I actually find honestly fascinating about that page count is that this was an era where you weren't editing on an Avid, you were editing film. So the pace, there was almost nothing you could do for pace. You look at the way that a lot of Star Trek was shot, and so much of it was basically a oneer. It's like you got your master and your two pops, and that's it, man. And the fact that they could take scripts that were this long, which really, I think, give you the opportunity to fully flesh out a story, more so than I think. I think it's a little more difficult today. But the fact that they could do that, I think, is pretty fascinating.
Well, remember also, they only had 4 acts.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really limited in terms of VFX. A lot of today's sci-fi, you have long sequences, which are, these CGI, long CGI things. In the original Star Trek, I mean, you had 5 seconds here, maybe, a few seconds there, some stock of the Enterprise, some stock of a planet.
I thought Star Trek was all about a whole bunch of special effects.
So you had a lot of dialogue driven scenes too.
Oh.
And, dialogue, very dialogue heavy, because here, even in the description of the acts, 4 acts in length. Act 1 usually begins with the captain's voiceover, Captain Kirk dictating his log. Necessary backstory should be laid in here, not in the teaser. The captain's log should be succinct and crisp in ship's commander log language. Opening Act 1, we need some form of orbit, establishing, or other silent shot to give us time for both captain's log and opening credits. We must have a strong ending to Act 2, something that will keep the audience tuned to our channel. Yep. Again, something you would never find in the Bible today.
Never.
Even for a network show.
Yeah.
So, Ashley, tell us about the style.
The style. We maintain a fast pace, avoid long philosophical exchanges or tedious explanations of your equipment.
Well,
and note,
they should have had that in the Next Gen Bible.
Yeah, holy shit, which was nothing but long, tedious explanations of equipment, mainly because Lincoln Enterprises wanted to sell it. And note that our cutting technique, I just was talking about this, is to use the shortest possible time between idea and execution of it. Like, for instance, Kirk decides that a landing party will transport down to the planet. Hard cut. The lights blinking on the transporter console pulled back to reveal the landing party stepping into the transporter. But you know what? Today, you know what you do? We're going down to the planet. You would cut to the transporter effect on the planet. You would not even going to the transporter room is shoe leather. Although I appreciate what they're saying here, right? It's what's being communicated is there needs to be a sense of urgency in everything that we do. I think in part because you just don't have the time because these stories are so expansive, but also because
exactly what they're saying.
Right. It's you're also trying to maintain just this sense that Star Trek is a show that is on its feet, that at the end of the day, as smart as it is, as great with character as it is ultimately an adventure, right? We can't ever lose sight of the adventure of Star Trek. And that is when they're talking about the cutting technique, especially again, this is 1967, right? That's what's being communicated to me when I read this.
And any editor will tell you, you come in as late as possible in the scene as you leave as early. When you film the actor walking across the bridge and going into the turbo lift, that's going to get cut.
That's right.
It's just like, we need to beam down. And now, even now, I think you talk about we wouldn't see the transporter room. We just see them beaming down the plane.
I don't even think you see them beaming down. Yeah.
I think a lot of that is also because the world of Star Trek is much more clear after 50 years. Yeah. So you don't need to see people going to the transporter room and the act of beaming down, because back in 67,
no one knew what that was.
What that meant, what that entailed, right?
Snotty beamed me twice last night. It was fantastic.
So you need to see them go into the transporter room, and that's what sends them down to the surface. Now you don't need to do that because the iconography is very clear. If somebody's beaming down, they've been transported.
Right. In fact, you could probably get away with no beaming whatsoever. We're going down to the planet. Boom, you're on the planet, right? Everybody would understand that you use the transporter.
Yeah. Back then, it's like, how did they get there? Did they take a shuttlecraft?
Well, Mr. Kyle had to push the things. We had to do the insert shot of Mr. Kyle pushing the button.
Yeah. And here's where you talk about page count. This 70 pages, absolutely no more than 65 pages, please, which is for the final polished draft, which is, just having to read that alone and rewrite that.
Oh, my God.
And it says another, please, cast and set lists with your draft, which of course now is the job
of the script
coordinator. And final draft can do it in 2 seconds.
That's right.
They deserve more money just for having to do that.
That's right.
What a pain in the ass.
Total pain in the ass.
And it's really not the writer's job. So
it used to be.
Once upon a time.
Yeah. God, it's just like you talk about, look, they were cutting on a moviola. Nonlinear editing didn't come until the 90s. And it's just like how that changed the pace of everything. But even like the fact that, desktop publishing to go from, the stuff having to be typed and mimeographed, right. How that changed scripts. Even when you read the scripts, they're what we would now consider, insanely overwritten in terms of description. Now, they go into description of the Enterprise. I don't know if we really need to.
No, this is just
read that. This is all
to tell fledgling writers who aren't familiar with the show necessarily what the capabilities of the ship are and their tools and their toys.
Although I do want to point this out. Oh, go ahead, Ashley.
I was just going to say, I just want to flag the fact that they refer specifically to the salsa section, right? Which I don't think in the original series it was ever referred to as the salsa section. Yet, they did. When did they refer to it as the salsa section? Did they refer to it with a cool British accent?
No, I think it was the apple, and Kirk was talking about separating the saucer section.
That's true.
Okay, fair. All right, great point.
There is a lot of description. Again, this is when it was novel and there were no Star Trek blueprints or anything.
True.
Where they described the engineering section to which the two engine nacelles are attached is equally large and complex. Contains a hangar bay just large enough to hangar a whole fleet of today's jetliners. Turbo elevators, which can run both vertically and horizontally, interconnect every deck and compartment of this huge vessel.
Or just twirl around themselves for no damn good reason. Like
the point that why I'm reading this is to show the immense imagination on display in this Bible. And it says, included in addition to our bridge, sick bay, captain's cabin, other familiar standing sets are the widest possible variety of labs, technical departments, computer rooms, storage facilities, passenger accommodations, and cargo facilities. And then it gets into the crew. And again, we're not going to go into all this, although this part is interesting because, again, we talk about how Star Trek was ahead of the curve in terms of diversity. And while you may not like the language they use, it shows how important diversity was to Gene and the creators of the show. International in origin, completely multiracial. Okay, this isn't the Bible for the show. But even in the future century, we will see some traditional trappings, ornaments and styles that suggest the Asiatic, the Arabic, the Latin, etc. So far, Mr. Spock has been our only crewman with bloodlines from another planet. However, it is not impossible that we might discover some other aliens or part aliens working aboard our starship. Again, it is celebrating diversity, and it's saying that different ethnicities retain what makes their culture unique.
Yeah.
This is a very important paragraph in 1967.
And how?
Okay. So, this is something worth mentioning because, of course, this was largely dropped I mean, I know in Charlie X they work out and stuff, but
Charlie is our darling.
But it says we like ways of using the crewmen, extras as well as actors, to help suggest the enormous diversity of our vessel. For example, playing a scene in leisure attire as our people pass in sports gear, obviously going to or from a gymnasium or something.
Playing Parisi squares.
Life aboard the Enterprise, believably again, as in present-day naval cruiser, is not all hard work and stern devotion to duty.
Right.
Which is also another important thing, because a lot of the Star Trek post Next Generation really, are mostly on duty. There's not a lot of recreational stuff.
Honestly, the
holodeck.
Exactly. That's the only recreation we see. And look, the thing is, I mean, and I think, anyone who has worked in this business and like tried to write an episode of anything knows that, like, as much as you want to talk about scenes where characters do nothing, unless you're writing Seinfeld, the reality is those are the first things you cut, because your stories have to move forward. And, yes, like, I guess, like, there's a version of, setting scenes in the context where your two camels, like, as it were, is, some leisure activity happening in the background. The reality is, like, number one, like, you want things to happen on their feet. Number two, the reality of production is you want to tell your story with as few sets as you possibly can. So when you start like taking things and consolidating them down into a place where you can make your days and you can get everything shot, right? The first thing that's going to go is the scene that's set off in some squirrely location where people are doing things you don't necessarily need to do, because that's another costume change. Those are other props. That's another set. That's all this other stuff that if you don't have to do it, it means that everything else can be just a little bit better, right? So even that, I think, is still it's an echo of some aspirational things you would find in a Bible versus the reality that we tend to see reflected in this document.
Yeah. And then the document goes on to talk about the ship's power and what warp speed is, which is great. This is all great Cliff Note stuff explaining how this stuff works. There's a nice description of warp factors, which is important for the writer to understand what that is. Then it gets into the ship's weaponry and explains the difference between phasers and photon torpedoes. Although, for those of you who enjoyed our Enterprise episode where we talked about the importance of a helmsman who can say phaser fire correctly, there is a description. The helmsman, Mr. Sulu, acts as weapons officer under the captain's direction. He coordinates the fire from the phaser rooms, using the vessel's navigational aids to lock the phasers on target, and on the captain's order, engaging the circuits which fire these weapons. Which is good too, because it was weird, because after Balance of Terror, you really wondered what happened to the phaser control room. It seemed like you didn't really need that; you just operated it from the helm. But this is saying that no, it's operated from phaser rooms, but it's controlled by the bridge.
Obviously, with the level of competence that they had crewed the phaser control room in before, they replaced it.
Well, plus there is the storytelling reality, right? In Balance of Terror, it was interesting, okay? Because Balance of Terror is essentially a submarine movie. Your phaser control room is basically your torpedo control, right? Like, you don't just push a button and off the torpedoes go. Right. There are people who are down there who are loading those things, like they're setting up the ordnance. They're the ones who are doing the firing. And I think
especially when they make the story more interesting.
That's right. But when you just need to fire the goddamn phasers, the last thing you need to do, you press the button, man. You just press the button.
Yeah. Well, now it goes into a description of our characters. So this will be interesting to see how much they got right and how much changed.
They definitely got William Shatner right.
They did.
Yes.
Captain's log, supplemental. Now motionless for 9 hours, 47 minutes.
Can I get you something from the galley, sir? Coffee, at least?
Thank you, Yola. Bring it to the bridge. I'll be there in a moment.
Yes, sir.
I wish I were on a long sea voyage somewhere. Not too much deck tennis, no frantic dancing, and no responsibility. Why me? I look around that bridge. I see the men waiting for me to make the next move. And Bones, what if I'm wrong?
Captain, I don't really expect an answer, but I've got one. Something I seldom say to a customer, Jim. In this galaxy, there's a mathematical probability of 3 million Earth-type planets. And in all of the universe, 3 million galaxies like this. And in all of that, and perhaps more, only one of each of us. Don't destroy the one named Kirk.
So, Darren, if you will, read us the Bible's description of Captain James T. Kirk.
I think Gene Roddenberry is going to tell us about James T. Kirk.
Oh, I'm so glad that Gene would join us for this. I know he was busy doing his Tarzan series at the time, but it's great that he is willing to take the time to be with us now.
This is Captain James T. Kirk. Played by William Shatner, Kirk is about 34, an Academy graduate, rank of Starship Captain. A shorthand sketch of him might be a space-age Captain Horatio Hornblower, constantly on trial with himself, a strong, complex personality. With the starship out of communication with Earth and Starfleet bases for long periods of time, a starship captain has unusually broad powers over both the lives and welfare of his crew, as well as over Earth people and activities encountered during these voyages. He also has broad power as an Earth ambassador to alien societies. In his galaxy sector or on new worlds he may discover, Kirk feels these responsibilities strongly and is fully capable of letting the worry and frustration lead him into error. He is also capable of fatigue and inclined to push himself beyond human limits, then condemn himself because he is not superhuman. The crew respects him, some almost to the point of adoration. At the same time, no senior officer aboard is fearful of using his own intelligence in questioning Kirk's orders and can sometimes themselves be strongly articulate up to the point where Kirk signifies his decision has been made. Important, although Kirk will not often solicit information and estimates from Spock, never does the first officer act as Kirk's brain. Our captain is a veteran of hundreds of planet landings and space emergency. He has a broad and highly mature perspective on command, fellow crewmen, and even on alien life customs, however strange or repugnant they seem when measured against Earth standards. On the other hand, don't play Kirk like the captain of an 1812 frigate in which nothing or no one moves without his command. Spock, McCoy, Scotty, Sulu, and Uhura are a trained team and are well able to anticipate information and action Kirk needs. Aboard ship, Captain Kirk has only a few opportunities for anything approaching friendship. One exception is Mr. Spock, a strange friendship based upon logic, high mutual respect, and Spock's strong Vulcan loyalty to a commander. Another is with ship surgeon Dr. McCoy, who has a legitimate professional need to constantly be aware of the state of the captain's mind and emotions. But on a shore leave, away from the confines of self-imposed discipline, Jim Kirk is likely to play pretty hard, almost compulsively so. It's not impossible he will let this drag him at one time or another into an unwise romantic liaison, which he will have great difficulty disentangling. He is, in short, a strong man forced by the requirements of his ship and career into the often lonely role of command, even lonelier because starship command is the most difficult and demanding task of his century.
Wow, they got that right, didn't they?
They did.
Sure did.
It's almost as though they were watching the show.
Well, and what a dynamic, and I compare that to the description of some of the other characters and some of the other shows we read. There's a depth and a complexity that I think is lacking in a lot of the other characters.
Like Jackson Archer.
You like Jackson Archer, sure. I mean, this is really, it's all there on the page, isn't it?
Well, and to be fair, they've been doing this for a year. So
yes, exactly.
If it isn't there on the page after going through all those episodes, which solidified the Kirk character.
Look, how many episodes was it? Like 26 in the first season?
Yeah.
Which would make it the longest running show on Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Mr. Spock, there's a lot in the beginning of this where they just talk about how he interfaces with the computer and the mic, and being the science officer. We're going to skip all that because there's nothing particularly interesting about that. But when they start to describe him, they start with Mr. Spock's mother was human.
Spock, serial number S179-276SP, service rank, Lieutenant Commander, position, First Officer, Science Officer, current assignment, USS Enterprise, commendations, Vulcanian Scientific Legion of Honor, awards of valor, twice decorated by Starfleet Command.
Mr. Spock, as a first officer, you know a great deal about computers, don't you?
I know all about them.
It is possible for a computer to malfunction, is it not?
Affirmative.
Do you know of any malfunction which has caused an inaccuracy in the Enterprise computer?
Negative.
That answer is based on your mechanical survey of the Enterprise computer, ordered by the defendant prior to this trial, is it not?
Affirmative.
Now, the star
But the
date...
computer is inaccurate, nevertheless.
Why do you say that?
It reports that the jettison button was pressed before the red alert.
In other words, it reports that Captain Kirk was reacting to an extreme emergency that did not then exist.
And that is impossible.
Is it? Were you watching him the exact moment he pressed the jettison button?
No, I was occupied. The ship was already on yellow alert.
Then how can you dispute the finding of the log?
I do not dispute it. I merely state that it is wrong.
Oh? On what do you base that statement?
I know the captain. He is
Please instruct the witness not to speculate.
Lieutenant, I am half Vulcanian. Vulcanians do not speculate. I speak from pure logic. If I let go of a hammer on a planet that has a positive gravity, I need not see it fall to know that it has, in fact, fallen.
I do not see what that
Gentlemen, human beings have characteristics, just as inanimate objects do. It is impossible for Captain Kirk to act out of panic or malice. It is not his nature.
In your opinion?
Yes. In my opinion.
Thank you. Your witness, Mr. Cogman.
So, Gene, if you could take us through that.
Well, as you mentioned, Mr. Spock's mother was human. His father is a native of the planet Vulcan. This alien-human combination results in Mr. Spock's slightly alien features with the yellowish complexion and satanic pointed ears. Thus, he is biologically, emotionally, and even intellectually a half-breed. He's considerably stronger than his human crewmen. He can endure lack of water and higher temperatures for a longer period. His hearing is particularly keen. He also has a strange Vulcan ESP ability to merge his mind with other intelligence, read the thoughts there. He dislikes doing so since it deprives him of his proud stoic mannerisms and reveals too much of his inner self. Also, the physical and emotional cost of this is quite high. And we now realize that Spock is capable of feeling emotion, but he denies this at every opportunity. On his own planet, to show emotion is considered the grossest of sins. He makes every effort to hide what he considers the weakness of his half-human heredity.
That's a great distillation of the character, don't you think, guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing about Spock is that they at the beginning they didn't really know how all this went together. It was a combination of the writers and Nimoy figuring this out, figuring out how his mannerisms were to convey this character.
But the reality of television is that to one degree or another, that's always the conversation between the writing and the actor. that the performance tells the writer things. Like even from like the first set of dailies, you just kind of know. You look and you go, like, oh, all right. Like I see what this actor is doing that's interesting, and I want to write to that. Like, or like, here's this thing that I thought was going to work that doesn't work at all, but here's this other thing that maybe does. And look, sometimes you're right. You know, like sometimes the way that you kind of convey that character on the page, the actor picks it up the ball and like they run with it, and it's exactly what you hoped it would be. But very often, like you are building something together. That's the collaborative creative process. And I think in the case of Spock, it's particularly pronounced.
Yeah. And you know, Ashley, from the many shows you've worked on, you can have an actor that you've booked at the beginning of the season as a 10 out of 10. And as soon as they go before the camera, you're like, well, we're not going to be doing a lot with them. I mean, I've had actors, you know, that've come up and said, oh, you know, I'm getting paid for these episodes, but, you know, because I'm 10 out of 10, but you're not really using me. And it's like, yeah, you know. And the opposite is true as well. Well, you get somebody's recurring and you want to use them in every episode, you know, maybe you have them for 7 to 10 or whatever. And, you know, or 7 to 13. And it's like, oh my gosh, I wish they, you know, we'd put them in because they find a place on the show.
That's exactly right. There are actors who are just second, like tertiary, quaternary, like supporting characters who somehow manage to act their way onto the show, and you realize they are just insanely useful. And there are actors you think, oh, I'm going to have them, and this has definitely happened to me. Like, I think I'm going to have them in nearly every episode, and then I realize, no, you know what? I'm just not.
Yeah. And it sucks because then you have to pay them because you booked them for, you know, and then you're not using them, and it's frustrating because you're like, oh, I could use that money for something else.
That's right.
But so now. Again, they start with a description of Leonard Bones McCoy, knowing what we know about medicine and everything else. But there's a great description of the character here, which really goes to the heart of Bones, which is McCoy is portrayed as something of a future day H.L. Mencken, a very, very outspoken character with more than a little cynical bite in his attitudes and observations on life. He has an acid wit, which results in sometimes shocking statements which under close scrutiny carry more than a grain of truth about medicine, man, and society. Of all the men aboard our starship, McCoy is the least military. He is filled with idiosyncrasies which fit the character and are his trademark. For example, he loathes the transporter system of beaming personnel from ship to ship to planet surfaces and loudly proclaims that he does not care to have his molecules scrambled and beamed around as if he were a radio message. McCoy is highly practical in the old general practitioner sense, hates pills except when they are vitally needed, is not above believing that a little suffering is good for the soul.
I keep imagining
the maturity of the individual. He has a great fear that perfect medicine, psychotherapy, and computers may rob mankind of his individuality and his divine right to wrestle a bit with life.
There's a little bit of Scientology in there.
He is a superb physician and surgeon, often seems to be treating the wrong ailment, but usually is proven right in the end. Dr. McCoy is 45 years of age, was married once, something of a mystery that ended unhappily in a divorce. He has a daughter, Joanna, who is 20 and in training as a nurse somewhere. McCoy has provided for her, hears from her as often as intergalactic mail permits, but his duty aboard the starship keeps them apart. We will suspect that it was the bitterness of this marriage and divorce which turned McCoy to the space service. He was born in Georgia in the United States and can be something of the gallant Southern gentleman in social life, particularly with females. When the moment is right, a trace of his Southern accent will be heard. Now, that is so interesting.
And I wonder, it doesn't say anything about his divorce leaving him just his bones.
That's right.
Ellen,
Yes, sir?
what was the problem down there?
He insisted we go first, sir. Said something about first seeing how it scrambled our molecules.
That's a familiar ring, isn't it? Starfleet, this is Captain Kirk. Beam that officer up now.
Well, for a man who swore he'd never return to Starfleet.
Just a moment, Captain, sir. I'll explain what happened. Your revered Admiral Nagura invoked a little-known, seldom-used reserve activation clause. In simpler language, Captain, they drafted me.
They didn't.
This was your idea. This was your idea, wasn't it?
Bones is a thing out there.
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
Headed this way. I need you. Damn it, Bones. I need you. Badly.
Permission to come aboard?
Permission granted, sir.
Well, Jim, I hear Chapel's an MD now. Well, I'm going to need a top nurse, not a doctor who'll argue every little diagnosis with me. And they probably redesigned the whole sick bay, too. I know engineers, they love to change things.
But what's so interesting is I wonder if this was Dorothy or if this was Jean, because of course Joanna was a real personal important to DC.
Yeah.
And you know, she did write the episode Joanna, which quite inexplicably was changed by Fred Freiberger to ultimately become The Way to Eden. But this was a big part of the mythology that was never a part of the series.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, like, maybe, you know, when we're saying like this was all Jean, like maybe this was, as we say in the business, a gangbang, right? Where it's like, you know, you just have like the writers who are closest to this thing, like parceling out stuff. It's like Jean is writing the frequently asked questions list. Gene Kuhn.
You hear down the hall. Dorothy, could you pound out a page about Dr. Bones McCoy?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Your revered Admiral Nagura invoked a little-known, seldom-used reserve activation clause.
I find it so interesting that this has kind of become part of canon, despite the fact it was never on screen.
Right.
I never even alluded to. It's just that everyone kind of knows.
Because of that making a Star Trek book.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. And then it goes into the Spock McCoy feud and describes it. McCoy likes to regard Spock as little more than a sometimes useful piece of computer equipment. But when disagreeing constantly, they do work well together when it becomes necessary. And we're never sure, but what there could be some affection hidden between their constant battles. Like most cynics, at heart, he is a bleeding humanist. So very interesting. And then, of course, go figure, other running characters.
Sulu, still angry about missing one shot that gave him 30 seconds of coverage back in, 1966. But he'll complain about it until 2021.
By the way, Mr. Sulu, any chance of teaching me that body throw? Could come in handy sometime.
I don't know, sir. It isn't just physical, You have to be inscrutable.
Inscrutable? Sulu, you're the most scrutable man I know.
Well, as you say, Sulu is first up, even before Scotty. Describes the character's mixed Oriental ancestry, Japanese predominating. Sulu is contemporary American in speech and manner. In fact, his attitude towards Asians is that they seem to be rather inscrutable. Now, as we know, that was a deleted scene, mercifully deleted.
Yep.
Where they talk about the inscrutable Asian stereotype. Do you remember what that was?
I think that was Corbomite maneuver.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's a compulsive hobbyist. 1 week may be fascinated by botany with the intention of that becoming his lifelong avocation. Then another week will find he has switched to a determination of acquiring a galaxy famous collection of alien firearms.
Am I crazy, or wasn't he originally supposed to be the botanist?
He was the botanist.
Okay.
Yeah, and where no man has done before.
So this is the explanation for it. The retcon, as it were.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny. It says, and like all collectors, he is forever giving his friends 1,000 reasons why they too should take on the same hobby.
So Sulu is basically Rob Burnett.
Yeah, I guess, with the exception of the interest of firearms. Yes, you could say
action figures. What if Sulu collected action figures? That would be fantastic.
My goodness.
Oh my.
Yeah, and then it goes on to talk about what a great officer he is. And, when the chips are down, he immediately becomes another character, a terse professional whose every word and deed relates solely to the vessel and its safety. This is a fine description of Sulu and, interesting character traits. Then we have Engineering Officer Scott, which he is portrayed by Jimmy Doohan. He's known to most as Scotty, and with an accent that drips of heather and the Highlands.
When are you going to get off that milk diet, lad?
This is vodka.
Where I come from, that's soda pop. Now, this is a drink for a man.
Scotch?
Aye.
It was invented by a little old lady from Leningrad.
Oof.
And Canada.
Oh, Canada. But on the other hand, he did get his finger shot off on D-Day.
Well, that's true.
Darren,
we like to call it Doing Day.
Well, and Doohan, of course, was a good friend of Gene's.
Yep.
So, Gene, if you would, can you describe engineering and spaceships are his life?
Well, I think we're going to have Jimmy Doohan come in and tell us. Engineering and spaceships are his life. His idea of a pleasant afternoon is tinkering in any engineering section of the vessel. He's totally unable to understand why any sane man would spend reading time on anything but technical manuals. He's strong-minded, strong-willed, and not incapable of telling off even a Starfleet captain who intrudes into what Scotty regards as his own private province and area of responsibilities. Kirk understands his engineering officer's fierce love of his vessel and his engines will take more guff off this officer than almost any other aboard the ship. Regarding him, Kirk has one rule. If it doesn't run, take it to Scotty. If he can't fix it, it's irreparable.
Fantastic. Wow. That's great. Okay, well, look, and Scotty, again, one of the most memorable characters of Star Trek. Everyone knows Scotty.
Yep.
So, Jimmy Doohan's memorable performance, but also a very memorable role, despite not having a lot to do. And in fact, when he was given the spotlight, not some of Star Trek's best episodes.
Well, although
that's true.
As we've talked about in that completely separate podcast, the TREKSPERTS Briefing Room, when he is left on the ship to command, he does a pretty damn good job.
He's great in command. He's great, whether it's Wink of an Eye, whether it's That Which Survives, or A Taste of Armageddon, or Friday's Child. He's great when he's in command.
Yep.
Well, look,
that was the best use of him.
Some characters are simply not meant to carry entire stories. I'm looking at you, Dr. Crusher. It's like there are characters who are wonderful in support roles. And if you put them in the right place in a support role, they're perfect. And as you said, it's like, Scotty was a perfect, okay, Spock and Kirk are off the ship. Who are you going to put in charge? Jimmy Doohan. Why not? Right. He was so believable as the military man who was in command of the starship. But
great. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean
I was going to say, it's just like when you put him, you do Wolf in the Fold, and suddenly it's like,
How great is he in The Apple, where he says, I guess you're going to have to fire me. You're fired. It's like, Kirk's just total, he can't believe that Scotty couldn't figure it out. He just, you're fired. It's like, oh God, he's just beaten down. It's really great. So, Doohan was such an important part. Scotty was such an important part of the success of that show. And, the biggest problem, as we've talked about in the movies, they turned him into comic relief, and Scotty was not that in the show.
As much as we, I think, collectively probably appreciate Star Trek V more than any three people in the freaking universe, the truth of the matter is that when he walks into the goddamn pipes, it just, I think I speak for all of us when I say it makes us crazy.
No, it's an embarrassment. Look, that was the Star Trek 4 effect. It was just them trying to work in a humor that was not appropriate for that movie. So one of the most memorable but under sort of served characters was Uhura. Interestingly enough, in the Bible, she does not have the name Neota. Didn't become. It wasn't canon. I think it was created for the novels, actually.
Yeah, was it first in the Entropy Effect?
Yeah,
right.
So,
which I have sitting literally on my shelf right now, the very first edition, the Timescape edition of the Entropy Effect.
So,
but of course, her last name was taken from the novel Uhuru, which means freedom. And Jean just sort of feminized the name and gave it to her.
And it's a great name. And Uhura was born in the United States of Africa, according to the Bible, quick and intelligent. She's a highly efficient officer and expert in all ship systems relating to communications. Uhura is also a warm, highly female off-duty. She is something of a favorite in the recreation room during off hours, too, because she sings old ballads as well as the newer space ballads.
Like Charlie is my darling.
And she can do an impersonation at the drop of a communicator.
Really?
What?
Can she do
Can she do Gene Roddenberry? That would be great.
Yes, she can.
Actually, she did. I'm sorry. No. Let's delete that. That was
You
wrong.
set us up
on
for
every
that
level.
one.
Yeah.
Okay. So interesting. Not a ton of information there about her.
Yeoman.
But, and it just shows how much Nichelle did with that role. But now we come to an interesting thing, as the gentleman just indicated, the role of yeoman. Now, obviously, this had originally been Janice Rand, and it was changed. So
We have a large supply of entertainment tapes, gentlemen.
No, we've a tight schedule to make, Captain. Just 20 of us. We're making out fine.
This must be a space first. This transport ship that doesn't need anything. Nothing. Not even sorry and brandy?
We're fine, thank you. Pleasant journey, Captain.
Thank you. Gentlemen Rand, this is Charles Evans. Show him to his quarters and drop his records off at Dr. McCoy's office, if you will.
Yes, sir. Come with me, please.
Are you a girl? Is that a girl?
That's a girl.
Darren, can you read this to us, and then let's see if we can unpack it.
Well, played by a succession of young actresses, always lovely.
Oh, jeez.
One such character has been well established in the first year, Yeoman Janice Rand, played by the lovely Grace Lee Whitney. Whether Yeoman Rand or a new character provided by the writer, this female yeoman serves Kirk as his combination executive secretary, valet, military aide. As such, she is always capable, a highly professional career girl. As with all female crewmen aboard, during duty hours, she is treated co-equal with males of the same rank, and the same level of efficient performance is expected. The yeoman often carries a small over-the-shoulder case, a tricorder, about the size of a small handbag, which is also an electronic recorder, camera, sensor combination, immediately available to the captain should he be away from his command controls.
Well, again, let's point out 1967, and they're saying it right here, equal to the men.
And
with the same abilities and treated with the same respect.
Co-equal with males of the same rank.
Yes.
And same level.
We are
of
still in a
efficient
military
performance.
organization.
So
yes,
they're not. These are not. These are not written as somehow. Not as efficient or not as professional or as capable as the men. Equal.
That's right.
And it's this is so important because again, the era in which television was not doing that with their female characters.
Yeah,
so this is extremely important.
I'll say, as a fan, okay, now obviously, like we have a different perspective on this now in 2021, and we sort of have a deeper understanding of all the things that were going on. But as a fan, when Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out, I was a little disappointed that we had all the other characters who were there on the bridge, and we dealt with them, and they felt like they were all sort of part of the family. But I was like, where was Yeoman Rand? Right,
She was in the transporter room.
She was in the transporter room, but it felt like she was, to me, like as a kid growing up watching Star Trek, Yeoman Rand always felt more important than some of the other supporting characters did. And it was just always odd to me as a kid. I'm not saying now. Now I fully get it.
I know what you're saying. That it felt like a demotion.
Yeah.
It wasn't worthy of her stature because she had been a bridge officer and now she was down in the transporter room.
Right.
Well, obviously, with how she handled the transporter accident, maybe she didn't even belong there.
Well, what we got back didn't live very long, fortunately.
And then, of course, the cast would not be complete without a paragraph devoted to
Majel. Is Majel in every Bible?
Close to it. I mean, I love when they had Loaxon Troy in the Deep Space Nine Bible. Nurse Christine Chappell, and this describes her as being having several university degrees in research medicine. She's found a measure of contentment in this life as a Starfleet nurse and wanderer. Of course, that's because Dr. Robert Corby turned out to be an android. Roger Corby turned out to be
three times.
Turned out to be a which is just anyway. So I added that part about Roger Corby being an android, but anyway, it says has a near professional confidant of Bones. And it's saying it's like she is as close to a professional confidant as the irascible Bones McCoy is likely to have. That relationship never transgresses onto the personal, and an unspoken bond is the fact that she too is in Starfleet service because of a tragic romance.
Yeah,
yes, that'd be Roger Corby.
I think it's unspoken because they never talk about it.
I know.
Right.
It's like, wow. I mean, I don't even think the novels did that.
It's so unspoken. You don't even know what the hell it is.
Yeah. Now the next section is devoted to standing sets. Now, be interested to see if there are any standing sets they did not use. My guess is that since this was written at the end of the first season, it is only sets that we've seen. I don't think there's going to be any like, wow, how come they never shot that?
And some things are saying are redresses, right? Like I fixed on, the ship's chapel, but redress the transporter room. And of course, we do see the ship's the ship's chapel.
Well, they were amazing at redressing sets.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to be, right? That's just good producing.
Now, absolutely. Mark, I'm going to bring up a point of order.
Shit.
We've gone about an hour and a half. Might I suggest that we cut this episode here and return next week with a continuation of the TOS Bible?
Are you saying that this should be a 2-part episode? That this is the menagerie? Are these transmissions coming from Talos 4?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
let me ring my bell so that I can signal the end of this episode and the beginning of another. Ding, ding. Okay. Well, I think I second the motion. Ashley, do I hear a third? Do I hear a negative vote?
We are unanimous.
Okay. Well, then we are unanimous. So this was part 1 of the original Star Trek Bible, and we'll return here to this very spot next week with part 2.
Bat time
of
same bat channel.
Genesis, exploring the original series Bible, part 2. And until then, I want to thank Bill Ritter, our fantastic sound engineer, our producers, Natalie Miscali, Peter Holmstrom, Zach Raggets, and all of you for continuing to indulge us by listening to this podcast, our sister podcast as well. And of course, I encourage you to join us on our sister podcast, the TREKSPERTS Briefing Room, an entirely different podcast where we do audio commentaries for various significant Star Trek episodes. So until Ashley, Darren, and myself return next week, and you can find out how this all ends, I want to tell you one last thought, and that is to keep on trekking, ingloriously, of course.
You're listening to the Electric Surge Network.